On February 10, 2018, Fernanda Maciel sat down for lunch with her mother, Paula. It seemed like just another ordinary day, but sometimes when everything feels normal, life is about to take its darkest turn. Paula noticed her daughter wasn't acting like herself. Fernanda was unusually quiet, as if something heavy was weighing on her mind. She didn't laugh or joke with her younger brothers and sisters the way she always did. That evening, around 5:30, Fernanda left the house. She carried only her keys and her cell phone. She crossed a familiar intersection and walked down La Lima Street, a path she had taken countless times before. But this time, she never made it back home. Paula waited for her daughter, but the worry kept growing. Every call to Fernanda's phone went straight to voicemail, as if the device had been turned off. What made it worse was that Fernanda was 7 months pregnant. The next day, on February 11th, Paula and Luis Peterson, Fernanda's partner and the father of her unborn child, went to the police to report her missing. The investigation started immediately. But since there were no clear signs of a crime, Chile's investigative police didn't take over the case yet. Local officers put out alerts, shared information on social media, and started questioning neighbors. The only real lead was a security camera recording. At 5:29, Fernanda was seen crossing Puntiego Street. But then something strange happened. None of the other cameras in the area ever caught sight of her again. Despite all the effort, no new clues appeared. No witnesses, no social media activity, no financial transactions. Days turned into weeks, and then months. As Fernanda's due date drew closer, her disappearance became even more haunting. Many feared the worst, but her family refused to give up. They were determined to uncover the truth and bring her home. Fernanda Maciel was born on May 9, 1996 in Santiago, the capital of Chile. After her parents divorced in 1999, she and her siblings stayed with their mother, who soon moved the family to the Conchali district. As a child, Fernanda adjusted easily to change. She did well in school, was cheerful, and kept a close relationship with her father. But when her teenage years began, things started to shift. School became a struggle, and her personality grew more explosive. Arguments with classmates, siblings, and even her mother became a regular occurrence. Worried about her daughter, Paula turned to school psychologists for help. In 2007, Fernanda was sent to a youth center for troubled teens, but it had little effect. She kept coming home late, and sometimes didn't come home at all. Police often found her in the company of teens linked to drug use. Impressionable and easily influenced, Fernanda picked up the habits of her new crowd and sank deeper into addiction. She still lived with her mother and siblings, but emotionally, she drifted away from them. Most of her time was spent sleeping, and when she left the house, it was usually to meet friends or to feed her addiction. Her grades kept slipping, and eventually, she was forced to repeat a school year. Then came a turning point. On July 2, 2012, her father suddenly passed away from a stroke. That tragedy changed Fernanda's life forever. Fernanda was devastated by her father's death. To honor him, she got a tattoo with his name. But instead of helping her heal, the loss only sped up her downward spiral. Every attempt her family made to help ended in arguments. She often left home, spent nights on the streets, and sank deeper into addiction. Even so, Fernanda managed to finish school and got a job as a hostess at a nightclub. But that environment only fueled her destructive habits. Her relationships with men were chaotic, one after another, and her life seemed to be slipping further out of control. Everything began to change when she met Luis Peterson, a 36-year-old taxi driver who seemed to truly care about her. Luis won Paula's trust and soon became a welcome guest in their home. With him, Fernanda started showing signs of change. She nearly gave up drugs, and although her relationship with Luis wasn't always calm, it was steady compared to her past. Like many couples, they had moments of jealousy. Once Fernanda even scratched his taxi. But those incidents were rare. Eventually, she left the nightclub behind and found work as a waitress at a local restaurant. It was safer and more stable, but when her employer discovered she was pregnant, she was fired. This time, Fernanda refused to be defeated. She filed an official complaint with the labor board and managed to get her job back. By the time she disappeared, Fernanda had come a long way. From a turbulent past, she had grown into a more mature and determined woman. She was looking forward to becoming a mother, ready to start over and build a better life. Nearly a month passed, and there was still no trace of Fernanda. On March 5, 2018, her desperate family filed an official complaint against the police. That pressure forced authorities to hand the case over to Chile's investigative police, a division well known for handling serious crimes. Investigators immediately began exploring different theories about Fernanda's disappearance. One of those theories was that she had run away. They speculated she might have left after an argument with Luis, or to meet another man. That idea made headlines when a couple vacationing in Argentina claimed they had seen a woman who looked like Fernanda, and who they believed had even undergone plastic surgery. Hoping against hope, Paula traveled to Argentina, but after searching carefully, she firmly rejected the theory. She insisted Fernanda would never leave behind all of her belongings. Besides, Fernanda had plans for her future. She was looking forward to moving into the new home Luis was building for their growing family. Then investigators asked themselves, could Fernanda's disappearance be tied to her past? Even though she had seemed to leave that life behind, troubling rumors started to surface. Witnesses claimed they had seen her the day before she vanished with a well-known drug dealer, Alejandro Ayusin, and his partner, Maria Oray. They even said Fernanda was carrying some kind of package, but both Alejandro and Maria quickly provided alibis. After being checked, they were ruled out as suspects. Next came the theory of an accident. Maybe Fernanda had been struck by a car while walking down that same road. But there were no crash reports, no evidence, and nothing unusual on security cameras. That idea was soon dismissed. Another possibility was depression. Some wondered if Fernanda could have taken her own life. But her family and friends firmly rejected it. They reminded everyone that she was excited to become a mother and was working hard to build a new, stable life. Kidnapping was also considered. Yet no ransom was ever demanded and no physical evidence supported the theory. The final version was the darkest one, that her disappearance was connected to her old ties in the criminal world. Investigators didn't rule out the idea that she could have been killed over debts. But just like the other theories, no solid proof was ever found. Chile's investigative police started looking closely at everyone connected to Fernanda. Several people came under scrutiny. Each of them could have had both motive and opportunity. The first suspect was her partner, Luis Peterson. On the surface, their relationship seemed stable. But Fernanda's friends said she had confided in them, telling them that Luis could be controlling and verbally abusive. Luis didn't completely deny the tension. He admitted they had arguments but insisted, "We had problems like any couple, but we were excited about our baby girl and planning for the future." Investigators carefully checked his alibi. At the time Fernanda vanished, Luis was confirmed to be somewhere else. Despite the doubts about their relationship, there was no evidence linking him to a crime. In the end, he was ruled out as a suspect. The next person under suspicion was a taxi driver often seen with Fernanda. Friends said he was overly persistent, asking for her phone number and even offering baby items. The driver, however, insisted he never bothered her. According to him, she gave him her number willingly after he once drove her to the hospital. But recovered text messages from Fernanda's phone told a different story. In them, she complained to friends that the driver was way too pushy. Even so, he had a solid alibi. Forensic tests on his car also showed no signs of a crime. Investigators then turned to Fernanda's co-workers at the restaurant. Some described her as a young woman trying to turn her life around. Others recalled frequent arguments with staff about tips, tardiness, and rules. One manager even admitted she wasn't liked by anyone. Still, none of the employees had a clear motive or real opportunity to harm her. In the end, they too were crossed off the suspect list. But there was another person in Fernanda's life, her longtime friend and neighbor, Felipe Andrés Rojas Lobos. They had known each other for over 10 years. Rumors spread that on the day Fernanda vanished, she had planned to meet him at the warehouse where he worked. Security cameras showed Fernanda at 5:29 in the evening, walking toward that warehouse. But the footage that should have shown her going inside was missing. When questioned, Felipe admitted they were supposed to meet but claimed she never showed up. He even sent her a message at 8 in the evening with the following content: "You never came, friend. I waited for you." Investigators, however, weren't convinced. They decided to keep a closer eye on him, and soon their doubts grew stronger. Just 2 days after Fernanda disappeared, cameras caught Felipe carrying a 25-kilo bag of cement into the warehouse. A purchase he had made recently, and one that had nothing to do with his actual job. The red flags were piling up. On February 1st, security cameras caught Felipe checking out other cameras along La Lima Street. It looked like he was trying to see whether any of them recorded the warehouse entrance. With him was his friend Christian, the very person Felipe had asked to check where the cameras were pointing. Later, Christian went to the police on his own and told them everything. His testimony made Felipe look even more suspicious. The very next day, on February 14th, Felipe suddenly quit his job. That move raised eyebrows, especially since he had promised his employers he'd stay for at least a year. Early in the investigation, officers had already searched both the warehouse and Felipe's home, but at the time they found nothing. Still, Chile's investigative police never fully ruled him out. Even as the case stalled and new leads dried up, Felipe remained firmly on their radar. Everything changed 16 months later, in June of 2019. A woman came forward to police with a shocking confession. She chose to remain anonymous, and in the case files, she was referred to as Nancy. Nancy revealed that Felipe had confessed to being behind Fernanda's disappearance. According to her, on February 10th, they had indeed met at the warehouse. There, he claimed, they used drugs together and talked. But the conversation quickly turned sour when Felipe mentioned his ex-girlfriend. Nancy said Fernanda reacted angrily and Felipe pushed her. She fell, hit her head on some furniture, and went into convulsions. Felipe panicked. He insisted he tried to help, but she no longer responded. In shock, he dug a hole in the back lot of the warehouse and buried her body. At first, when Nancy questioned him about it, Felipe claimed he had made it all up during a breakdown. She believed him. But over time, his behavior shifted. He became jumpy, constantly looking over his shoulder, begging her not to repeat what he had told her. That's when Nancy realized he might actually be telling the truth. After her statement, investigators returned to the warehouse. What they found there confirmed their worst fears. But the reality turned out to be far darker than Nancy could have imagined. On June 24, 2019, 16 months after Fernanda's disappearance, investigators arrived at the warehouse on La Lima Street. Behind the building, in a yard cluttered with debris and overgrown with bushes, they began digging. Forensic experts and police officers carefully cleared the ground, working by hand at first. About 35 centimeters down, they hit a solid surface, a concrete slab just over a meter long. Beneath it, they found a whitish powder that later turned out to be lime. The digging continued, and soon, a white sneaker emerged, still on a foot. It was the first undeniable sign they had found human remains. Further excavation revealed a body wrapped tightly in a white tarp, positioned in a curled posture. The hands were bound with fabric. From the clothing and appearance, there was no doubt. It was Fernanda. Evidence suggested she had been the victim of a violent assault. Surprisingly, the remains were remarkably well preserved. The lime and cement covering the body had essentially mummified it, keeping it intact for more than a year. Paula was called to the scene right away. When she arrived, her heart broke. She immediately recognized her daughter by her earrings and clothing. Later, investigators confirmed the family's worst fears through fingerprints and tattoos. The remains were indeed Fernanda Maciel. The autopsy results were grim. Experts found a fracture of the hyoid bone, an injury that often points to strangulation. There were hemorrhages in the neck muscles and clear signs of severe compression. All the evidence showed that Fernanda had died from strangulation, with significant force involved. Around her neck, investigators discovered a tightly tied strip of thick fabric. Forensic specialists concluded that this was the weapon used to take her life. Near the remains, they also found crucial evidence: a rusty set of keys with a heart-shaped keychain that belonged to Fernanda, pieces of her clothing showing signs of a struggle, and an empty cement bag, the same kind Felipe had purchased on February 12, 2018. Together, these findings pointed to a violent, likely premeditated crime and a deliberate attempt to hide it. Security cameras played a crucial role in piecing together what happened. On February 10, 2018, Felipe was caught on video arriving at the warehouse on his bicycle. 12 minutes later, the cameras recorded Fernanda leaving her home. She crossed Puntiego Street and walked toward the warehouse. Then, her figure disappeared behind thick bushes, and she was never seen again. At 5:33 in the evening, cameras caught two dogs running out of the warehouse. Investigators believe Felipe released them after bringing Fernanda inside. Experts suspect that between 5 and 7 in the evening, the crime took place. At 7:34 in the evening, Felipe was seen again on camera, leaving the warehouse on his bike. But instead of taking the short way home, just a few steps from Fernanda's house, he chose a longer detour. Later, investigators interpreted this as a clear sign of guilt. On February 12th, cameras in a Conchali hardware store showed Felipe buying a 25-kilo bag of cement. The light blue package with a brand logo was later found at the burial site. Soon after, he returned to the same store to purchase construction mix. Both times he carried the heavy materials on his bicycle. By February 13th, cameras caught him again, this time checking the street security cameras as if studying their angles. And on the very next day, February 14th, he suddenly quit his job. Piece by piece, his actions revealed what looked like a desperate attempt to cover his tracks and escape justice. The trial of Fernanda Maciel's case became one of the most high-profile in Chile. More than 58 witnesses testified, and 41 experts were brought in. The prosecution emphasized the cruelty of the crime and the vulnerability of the victim, a pregnant young woman who trusted Felipe, someone she had known for over 10 years. The defense attorney tried to push for a retrial, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. Prosecutors laid out a clear and consistent picture of the crime, highlighting Felipe's cold-blooded actions, his lack of remorse, and the particular brutality involved. One of the key points was his late and contradictory testimony. Felipe Rojas failed to provide a coherent version of events until December 20th, 2020, more than 34 months after Fernanda disappeared. By then, the case against him was already airtight. The recovered body, the confirmed cause of death, and the fact that he alone had access to the warehouse. His belated confession changed nothing. Investigators established that on February 10th, Felipe was the only person with keys to the warehouse. Both the owner and the manager confirmed this, as they were on vacation at the time. On top of that, Fernanda's close friend Nicolas testified that she herself had told him she was planning to meet a friend at the warehouse. That statement not only explained why she went there, it directly tied Felipe to the scene of the crime. But the most horrifying evidence came from Fernanda's body itself. Signs showed she had been the victim of a violent attack and likely sexual assault. This revealed a much darker truth than the story Felipe had shared with Nancy. Throughout the entire investigation, Felipe showed no sympathy, no remorse. Detectives described him as cold and manipulative. Worse still, he even made cynical jokes about Fernanda's death, once saying, "She's probably somewhere cooking right now." Prosecutors argued that Felipe was a narcissistic psychopath, detached from his own actions as if they had nothing to do with him. Based on all the evidence and testimony, the prosecution laid out for the court a chilling picture of Fernanda's final hours. On February 10th, 2018, Fernanda left her home and headed to the warehouse where Felipe was waiting. They had known each other for over 10 years, and she trusted him enough to go alone, carrying only her keys and phone. She had no reason to imagine the fate that awaited her. Later, investigators discovered the crime had been carefully planned. Days before their meeting, Felipe dug a pit in the warehouse yard, exactly the size of a human body. This level of preparation revealed clear intent. He had already decided to kill her and cover it up. At 5:30 in the evening, Fernanda arrived at the warehouse. By 5:33, Felipe had let the dogs out, likely to keep them from getting in the way. Inside, he betrayed her trust in the most brutal way. Using his physical advantage, he attacked Fernanda. Pregnant and barely 1.50 meters tall, she stood little chance of defending herself. Investigators determined she was violently assaulted, restrained, and left nearly unconscious. The official autopsy ruled her death as strangulation. But later analysis raised an even darker possibility. Fernanda may have still been alive when she was buried. Experts suggested she could have died from lack of oxygen, wrapped tightly in fabric and forced into a position where she simply could not breathe. Felipe likely thought she was already dead, but she may have been clinging to life. In the end, buried in that shallow grave, she suffocated. Her unborn daughter also never had a chance. Just before the tragedy, Fernanda had already chosen a name. She was going to call her baby girl Josefa. On April 25, 2023, the court delivered its final verdict against Felipe Rojas. He was found guilty and sentenced to the maximum penalty, life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judges emphasized that the sentence reflected the cruelty, deception, and premeditation of his actions. But above all, it was about preserving the public's trust in the justice system. Friends, what do you think about this story? Share your thoughts in the comments. Every opinion matters. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next investigation. The link is in the description below. This isn't goodbye. We have many more stories ahead that need to be told.